The language spoken by 10 million Hungarians today was born in northeastern Siberia, a region closer geographically to Alaska than to Finland, roughly 4,500 years ago. And the DNA that proves it was extracted from bones nobody connected to Hungary until 2025. That is not where this story was supposed to go. So let me show you how we got there. Because the journey from a Siberian steppe 4,500 years ago to the center of modern Europe is one of the most extraordinary migrations in the history of the human genome. Hungary, 10 million people, one language, surrounded on every side by German, Slovak, Slovenian, Romanian, Serbian, Croatian, and Ukrainian. Languages that are all related to each other, all members of the same vast Indo-European family that stretches from Iceland to India. And then there is Hungarian. It shares nothing with any of them, not a word, not a grammatical structure, not a rhythm. A Hungarian sentence sounds like it came from a completely different coordinate system compared to any language spoken within 1,000 miles of Budapest. The degree of similarity between Hungarian and Finnish, its closest relative, is comparable to the similarity between English and Russian, which is to say, barely any, and not in ways that help you. For over 1,000 years, ever since the Magyar tribes arrived in the Carpathian Basin in 895 AD, historians and linguists have debated the same question. Where did this language come from? How did a language from the edge of the known world end up permanently anchored in the geographic heart of Europe, surrounded on all sides by languages that have nothing to do with it? In 2025, a study published in the journal Nature, led by ancient DNA expert David Reich at Harvard University, provided the most complete answer that science has ever produced, and it is not what anyone expected. Most European languages share a common ancestry: English mother, Spanish madre, Russian mat, German Mutter. These are linguistic fossils of a shared ancestral tongue. But the Hungarian word for mother is anya. It connects to nothing in that chain. Its grammar, its vocabulary, its entire structural logic comes from a different family, Uralic. Its closest living relatives are Finnish and Estonian, spoken thousands of kilometers to the north, separated from Hungary by an unbroken wall of unrelated languages. The Finnish connection is disorienting once you understand it properly. Hungarian and Finnish are similar not because they are neighbors, but because they once were the same language. Proto-Ugric, the common ancestor, was spoken by a single population roughly 4,000 years ago. From that root, two branches separated. One moved northwest toward the Baltic and became Finnish and Estonian. The other moved south and west across the steppe and became the ancestor of Hungarian. 3,000 years of independent evolution later, speakers of each could not understand a word the other said. The relationship is real, visible in shared core vocabulary for numbers, body parts, and kinship terms, but completely useless for conversation. Two branches of the same tree, one in the far north, one in the heart of Central Europe, separated by the width of a continent and 30 centuries of silence. Encountering Hungarian in its geographic context is not like encountering a dialect or a regional variation. It is like receiving a transmission on a frequency that nothing else in the region is broadcasting on. The language is not a variation of what surrounds it. It is orthogonal to everything around it. That specific quality, not just different but structurally incompatible with everything around it, is what made it so difficult to explain for so long. So where did the transmission actually originate? For most of the 19th and 20th centuries, scholars believe the Uralic language family originated somewhere near the Ural Mountains of Western Russia. The logic was circular but satisfying. The mountains were even named after the language family. Problem solved. The DNA disagreed. David Reich's team at Harvard analyzed over 1,000 ancient DNA samples from across northern Eurasia. They found a unique genetic signature shared exclusively by Uralic-speaking populations, first appearing in unmixed form in 4,500-year-old human remains from Yakutia, a region of northeastern Siberia closer to Alaska than to Helsinki. Let that location settle for a moment. Alaska, not Finland, not the Ural Mountains, a region on the same longitude as Japan, where in the summer the sun barely sets and in the winter it barely rises. That is where the genetic trail of the Hungarian language begins. When scholars placed the Uralic homeland near the Ural Mountains, they were using geography as an argument. The mountains are there, the languages are there, therefore the origin is there. Ancient DNA does not reason from geography. It reads the biological record. And what it found was that the geographic inference was wrong by roughly 5,000 kilometers. That is not a minor correction. It is a demonstration that using place names as origin stories is a way of making the map do the work of the genome. And the genome, when you finally sequence it, is under no obligation to agree. The mechanism that carried the Uralic language westward was bronze. Around 4,000 years ago, a sudden explosion of advanced bronze casting technology swept across northern Eurasia. The Seima-Turbino phenomenon. Small, highly mobile groups carrying this technology and the Proto-Uralic language moved west across thousands of kilometers of boreal forest and steppe. Small groups. No numerical dominance. Continental scale linguistic effects. Drop your read in the comments, because that description fits the Seima-Turbino carriers 4,000 years ago. And it also fits the 7 Magyar tribes in 895 AD, and it fits a lot of other moments in history where the group with the most people did not win the linguistic argument. What other examples are you thinking of right now? By the late 9th century AD, a confederation of 7 Magyar tribes was living on the Eurasian steppe east of the Carpathian Mountains. They had never been a simple people. The Finno-Ugric roots of their language were inherited from Proto-Ugric ancestors. But over generations of contact with the Khazar and Bulgar powers on the steppe, they had absorbed Turkic political structures and vocabulary, to the degree that the names of their tribal leaders were Turkic in origin. The Turkic influence is not a theoretical inference. It is still sitting in the Hungarian dictionary. The words for grape, wheat, ox, horse, fruit, and sword in Hungarian are all Turkic loanwords from this period. The agricultural and pastoral vocabulary is predominantly Turkic, reflecting a relationship where Proto-Ugric speakers were acquiring settled farming knowledge from Turkic-speaking neighbors. Think about what that means. By the time the 7 tribes crossed the Carpathians, a people who spoke a Siberian language had a Turkic farming vocabulary. The genome and the language were already carrying contradictory histories before the conquest even began. Ancient DNA from conquest period cemeteries confirms this layering. 77% West Eurasian haplogroups, 23% Central and East Eurasian. The people who arrived in the Carpathian Basin in 895 were already a fusion from multiple directions. For roughly 60 years after the conquest, Magyar raiding parties traveled as far as France, Iberia, and Constantinople. A calculated economic strategy that made them one of the most feared powers on the continent. The raids ended at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, when Otto I defeated the Magyar army. The strategy then changed completely. The Magyars built a settled Christian kingdom, culminating in the coronation of Stephen I in the year 1000 AD with a crown sent by the Pope. It was not a raiding confederation's language that eventually survived 1,000 years of pressure. It was a kingdom's. David Reich described what the DNA from that period showed. 10 examples of very strong genetic connections between the Circum-Uralian region and the Carpathian Basin dating to almost exactly the same time. He used the word extraordinary for a reason. That degree of connection over that distance in that time frame implies not gradual migration, but something much faster. The image it produced for me, reading through that finding, was not of a slow demographic tide, but of a single generation making a decision that covered 3,000 miles. They arrived. They raided, they settled, they built a state, and their language survived the Mongol invasion of 1241, the Ottoman occupation from 1541 to 1699, the Habsburg Empire, 2 world wars, and 4 decades of Soviet rule. Every one of those powers tried to fold Hungary into something larger. The language refused all of them. Now here is where Hungarian genetics becomes genuinely unlike anything else in Europe. And this, of everything I found in this research, is the detail I have not been able to stop thinking about. The Magyar conquerors carried haplogroup N in their Y chromosomes at 37.5%, the specific genetic marker associated with Uralic peoples across northern Eurasia. Modern Hungarians carry it at approximately 5 to 7%. Modern Hungarians are, genetically, Central Europeans. Their DNA looks like their Austrian, Slovak, and Romanian neighbors. The neighbors who speak entirely different, completely unrelated languages. The Carpathian Basin in 895 was not empty. It held existing Slavic, Avar, and Germanic populations that far outnumbered the incoming Magyars. Over generations, the Magyar ruling class intermarried with that vastly larger local population. The specific Siberian and Central Asian markers they carried were diluted steadily until they were almost undetectable. David Reich calls this an elite replacement event. small groups imposing their language through political power rather than demographic replacement. The conquerors won. Their language survived, their DNA didn't. What I want to name directly to you is that this outcome, linguistic conquest without genetic conquest, is probably not as rare in history as we tend to assume. The Arabs who spread Islam and Arabic across North Africa in the 7th and 8th centuries did not genetically replace the Berber populations of the Maghreb. The Normans who imposed French-derived administrative language on England in 1066 did not replace the English genetically. The Magyar case is just the one where we now have precise enough ancient DNA to see the mechanism working in real time, grave by grave, generation by generation. This is the part that made me put the paper down. The Béla III finding makes the speed of absorption concrete. King Béla III ruled from 1172 to 1196 AD. A direct descendant of the Arpad dynasty that led the original conquest, and the only member of that dynasty whose burial site was found intact and genetically analyzable. His genome looks predominantly European, not partially, predominantly. Within 2 or 3 generations of the conquest, the ruling dynasty had been genetically absorbed into the population it governed. The genome moved fast. The language did not move at all. And this detail, I think, is the most underreported finding in all of Hungarian genetics. The 5 to 7% inner Asian/Siberian component that survives in modern Hungarians is real and measurable, but it is concentrated unevenly. The Szekely Hungarians of Transylvania, a community that maintained a fierce, distinct Hungarian identity for centuries, isolated by the geography of the Carpathian Arc, carry higher frequencies of the Eastern genetic markers than Hungarians in Budapest. Isolation preserved what integration diluted. The pockets of strongest Eastern genetic signal are precisely the communities most removed from the mainstream of Hungarian political and social life over the last 1,000 years. Geography. Again, doing the work of preservation that history was trying to undo. How does a language survive when the people who carried it are genetically absorbed by the people they conquered? Reich's answer is political power. The Magyar conquerors built a state. They controlled the land grants, the legal system, the church, the army, and the naming conventions. Speaking Hungarian was not a biological inheritance. It was the price of participation in the Kingdom of Hungary. And that price was collected, generation after generation, for over 1,000 years. Through the Mongol destruction, through the Ottoman partition of the country into 3 separate administrative zones, through the Habsburg administrative apparatus, and through Soviet-era attempts to flatten national identity into a single communist bloc identity. Every external pressure produced the same response. Hungarian became more explicitly the marker of what it meant to be Hungarian, precisely because external forces kept trying to replace it with something else. When the Habsburg Empire tried to replace Hungarian with German as the administrative language in the 19th century, it triggered one of the most deliberate acts of linguistic self-defense in European history. Writers and intellectuals led by Ferenc Kazinczy modernized and standardized Hungarian as an explicit political act, coining new words, standardizing grammar, making the language capable of competing with German in every formal register. The Habsburgs tried to fold it into German. The response was to make Hungarian more Hungarian than it had ever been. That is not stubbornness. That is a people understanding exactly what they would lose if they stopped. Reich made the modern parallel explicit. Many Americans speak English as a first language without having English ancestry. Language is transmitted through institutions, not blood, through schools, courts, governments, and economic necessity. The mechanism is the same as 895 AD. The scale is just larger. A genome and a language are 2 different inheritance systems. They run on different tracks, respond to different pressures, and have different survival requirements. A genome needs biological descendants. A language needs institutions and the power to make those institutions matter. In Hungary's case, the genome of the conquerors was outnumbered from the start. The institutions were not. The language of Yakutia survived in the Carpathian Basin not because the people of Yakutia replaced the people of Central Europe. It survived because a few thousand steppe warriors built something durable enough that speaking their language became part of what it meant to belong to the only state in the region. Modern Hungarians are genetically Central European. Their DNA is indistinguishable from their neighbors. But their language, the language those neighbors cannot understand, have never understood, will never understand without years of dedicated study, traces to 4,500-year-old remains from northeastern Siberia, closer to Alaska than to Finland. A people who vanished from their own genome. A language that survived everything they couldn't. That is one of the most extraordinary genetic paradoxes in all of European history, and it is not what anyone expected. The most durable human creations are not armies or empires or even genomes. They are the institutions people build to keep a language alive when everything around them is trying to replace it. Hungary kept it, against 1,000 years of pressure from every direction. And the people who kept it were not the biological descendants of the people who brought it. They kept it anyway. If this story surprised you, send it to someone who has Hungarian roots. The ghost of that Siberian migration is still in the genome, 5 to 7%, still there. Subscribe if you want more of this. Thanks for watching.